My name is Laura Packer, and it has been my honor and pleasure to work with the speakers you're about to hear. This morning, you're going to hear 6 speakers who are experts in their field, giving you a brief and bold talk. Now, brief and bold talks are brief. They're only 7 minutes long, and they are bold. You're going to hear these speakers talk about things that they are passionate about, a fragment of their work that will leave you hungry to hear more. I'm really glad that you're here to hear them because they have worked hard and their ideas are amazing. Our first speaker is Brendan Lehan. He's with the New Capitalism Project, and he is here today to talk with you about how collaborative work can be not only transformational in the moment, it can have long-term impacts that last long after the project or the problem are over. Please welcome Brendan.
What can the grove of aspens behind me teach us about transforming systems? This grove is known as Pando. It's located in the heart of Utah, and it's one of the world's largest and oldest living organisms. Comprised of almost 50,000 aspens, it's estimated to be 9,000 years old. Pando is also known as the trembling giant because on a windy day, its millions of leaves create a deafening chorus from their collective rustling. Imagine yourself standing inside this beautiful grove, feeling that deafening rustling above you. Now imagine looking down to your feet. Something quieter but even more powerful is happening there, invisible to the untrained eye. The key to Pando's scale, its health, and its longevity is its root system, which spans 106 acres and serves to coordinate energy production, communication, and defense across the grove. Pando can only truly be understood by looking here beneath at the connections among the trees, at Pando the system, rather than Pando the millions of individual leaves. The profound social change that we're all working on here at SOCAP can often feel like trembling giants, complex adaptive systems, wicked problems. Pando teaches us to look beneath and attend to the roots, where the real health of systems exists if we want to understand and we want to catalyze what's above. My name is Brendan Lehan, as Laura mentioned. I'm part of supporting a network of leaders called the New Capitalism Project, who are focused on transforming our economic system. Like a grove of trees, the New Capitalism Project is a network of leaders in their organizations. And like Pando's roots, the New Capitalism Project helps those leaders and their organizations work together in more powerful ways. The members of our community are working on a diverse array of approaches to shifting the norms, the behaviors, the rules, and practices of our business and financial sectors. United by our shared belief that the current application of capitalist principles, which permeates our economy, is out of step with our evolving world. That we have a toxic and underachieving economic system that works for a privileged few, but fails to work for most people and for the planet. Over the last 4 years, we've been working together, experimenting with how to transform that economic system. Not with a single breakthrough idea, but by working together in new ways. New ways of working that are defined by developing shared vision for what a transformed economic system looks like. Building a growing community that values the diversity of our approaches and builds relationships. In the New Capitalism Project Lab, developing a holistic and multi-layered understanding of the transformation that's required to achieve our vision, and supporting each other to develop portfolios of bold, transformative ideas for taking action. Looking across our organizations and across those portfolios of ideas, identifying opportunities for clusters of collaboration with which to drive the work forward. Like Pando, this stack of integrated activities has become new roots, new soil for our network of leaders and organizations. Roots that enable us to develop stronger relationships, have more transformational vision, and more coherent action. We're incredibly proud of the work that we've done over the years, but we face a tremendous challenge, one we know is pervasive and I'm sure faces many of you who are also working on equally complex systems. The challenge is that the bulk The vast majority of attention, of funding and resources goes to what we can see and hence what we value. Think the trees, the branches, the leaves in the grove of social change. Too little, or sometimes none, goes to the invisible interconnections, the enabling conditions among people, projects, and practices that we know are key to a system's health and therefore its transformation. Today, we have a dominant way of funding social change that looks like this: funding important but fragmented discrete projects and hoping that they'll somehow add up to systems transformation. We call this approach point solution funding. And we've been working within the New Capitalism project community and in collaboration with Rob Resigliano, the systems and complexity coach at the Omidyar Group, because we strongly believe that a different funding approach, a different financial architecture is needed to support systems change. A funding approach that looks more like this, that supports the critical enabling conditions. Think that stack of activities that we've built at the New Capitalism project and that we need more of to be able to transform our economic system. And the connections between those enabling conditions and the projects and clusters of projects that are necessary for taking action. What do we mean by enabling conditions? We mean the quality and we mean core enabling conditions that we think are necessary in any system, like the quality and quantity of relationships among actors within that system. Increasing the spread of information and learning throughout the system so that those leaders can develop a shared understanding of the complexity of their work. And we mean developing the transformational vision and the integrated portfolio of projects to take action in a different way. And we also mean specific enabling conditions, ones that are specific to each community's individual vision. For the New Capitalism project, that includes things like new narratives about the purpose of our economy, reimagining corporate governance, building movement power, new approaches to fiduciary duty, and others. We think of the funding architecture that can support that type of approach, the enabling conditions and connections with projects, a Pando Fund, in honor of Pando, its power, and what it teaches us about systems health. We envision Pando funds as a financing mechanism that would support 3 key activities for systems health. First, funding the orchestrating organization that builds and runs a systems change network. Second, empowers network practitioners to develop those core enabling conditions and the context-specific enabling conditions for their transformative work. And third, provides the seed funding for the clusters of projects to take action as part of an integrated portfolio. We envision Pando funds as multi-donor, multi-capital financing mechanisms. They orchestrate funders and finance as much as they orchestrate frontline leaders that are doing the work. We're currently in the midst of bringing together funders and frontline leaders from within the New Capitalism project and beyond to develop a prototype design for what a Pando fund looks like. One that we can use to support the work of the New Capitalism project community and that other networks of change makers can use to support their own work. Ultimately, we envision a funding landscape that's filled with many Pando funds, working in a variety of geographies on a rich diversity of issues, engaging leaders committed to working on our most intractable and broken systems. Pando funds that empower all of us to better see and to better act on the health of systems, their trembling canopies, and their interwoven roots. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rachel Sinha. She's the co-founder of the Systems Studio, and she is going to come out and remind us that innovative thinking, profound problem solving, and remarkable systems change work is happening everywhere, not just in the places we expect, and by everyone, not just the people that we assume are doing this work. Please welcome Rachel.
Thank you, Laura. So I'd love to start with a raise of hands in the audience. Who here lives and works in the center of the USA, sometimes known as flyover country? Okay, well, not very many of you. It's nice to see those of you who do. Well, I am Rachel, and I do live in flyover country. I live in St. Louis, sometimes known as St. Louis, but is the unceded territory of the Osage people. And I haven't always lived in flyover country, though. About 4 years ago, I was sitting on a very dusty floor in my kids' walk-in wardrobe, a few miles up the road in a sunset in San Francisco. My head was surrounded by princess dresses and robot costumes. And I was crying. I just got a phone call from my husband, who told me that after a very long search, he'd found a job, and we were almost certainly going to have to move to St. Louis in Missouri. I was devastated. I thought for sure my career would be over. But more than that, I'd heard about how people talk about people who work and live in the center of the country, and it wasn't good. I thought I was going to be moving to a place of backwardness and bigotry. I'm not from the USA. I was brought up in my parents' garden in the English countryside with the apple trees and the roses, and I went on to move to London, where I co-founded a project called the Finance Innovation Lab, which was launched in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. It was a partnership between the Institute of Chartered Accountants and WWF, and really a big fat experiment in bringing together people who don't normally talk to each other in that moment of crisis. We experimented with building accelerator programs and brought policy coalitions together. We hosted hundreds of gatherings. We nurtured the seeds of growing movements for change at the time, like impact investing and natural capital and alternative currencies. And I won a person of exceptional ability green card to come and live and work here in the US. So I moved in 2016 to New York with my young family, and then on to San Francisco, where I really hoped to put down deep roots. And all this time, my friends and colleagues who I was working with were telling me about what it's like in the center of the country, and I hadn't really been very much. Seen as kind of less sophisticated and more conservative and generally a little bit of a downgrade. People were surprised that I was moving there, and so I wasn't exactly like super pumped when I thought about moving. But when I got there and I Googled systems change St. Louis, I discovered Heather. Where is my clicker? Heather is that runs the Midwest Climate Collaborative. It's just the most brilliant program, and I spoke to her, and she is an ex-older woman who has been living in the city for her whole life. And she said to me, I don't have the ability, the luxury of being able to say, I'm not going to work with someone because they don't align with my liberal political agenda. So we have to make relationships forged on different things, and it makes our relationships stronger. And then I met Sarah Chung, who is like a maths genius, systems dynamics expert, world-renowned, happens to live in St. Louis, always has done, and is working on the root causes of systems inequity for early childhood education in the city. And then I met Natalie, who has lived in New York and also worked for a big foundation, and now has settled in St. Louis and is working on economic mobility for people who haven't previously benefited. So I thought, well, this is interesting. I'm finding some super cool people here, wasn't expecting to. And so this summer, I have interviewed 35 women-ex who are leading systems change initiatives and ecosystem projects in the center of the country, in the flyover states, the Rust Belt, the Sun Belt. As a Brit, I don't really know what to call it, but I will say this. It's the places where, when I say them to people who live in the international cities, they raise a bit of an eyebrow. And you might know what I'm talking about when I say that. This is a kind of a learned set of narratives that I had to learn when I arrived in the US. I didn't arrive with them. When I widened my search, I remembered that I knew Gail, and Gail runs REAMP, which is based in Duluth, and has been building the capacity of systems change across the region of Minnesota for a really long time. And then I met Irma, who is based in Arkansas, is coming from a place of lived experience of being an immigrant entrepreneur and is building this amazing entrepreneurial ecosystem for her people, Latin community in Arkansas. And then I met Sam from Allentown. And Sam is running one of the most sophisticated systems change projects that I've seen in all my 7 years of teaching systems change internationally. These, there is an old feminist adage which says, whoever names the world owns the world. We are in the process of building the field of systems change. Now we are also in the process of building systemic investing. And as we fix those concepts, as evaluation frameworks take hold, we must be careful of the unintended consequences of the people that we leave behind if we don't include them in the conversation. I know from my experience that many of the people who are building these frameworks live and work in some of the most progressive cities in the world. New York, San Francisco, Boston, etc., etc. The context is just so different in those places. I know that from my own experience. Some of you might be in this room. Some of you might be building those frameworks and live in those big cities. Or you might think you've got out of it because you live in the suburbs, but you're surrounded by the people who live in the cities, and I know that. And that's cheating. And my plea to you is this. As we fix these frameworks, as we build our strategies, please do not overlook the kick-ass, brilliant women-ex who are leading systems change in the middle of the country. They deserve your respect. They really deserve a seat at the table. And they really deserve to partner with you and get better funded. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jill Johnson. She is the CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. She's going to help us think through how, when we broaden our relationships, when we're willing to reach out to someone whom we might not otherwise befriend, it deepens our capacity for empathy. And it also helps us have a much bigger view of the world, a much greater understanding. Not only is this good for us personally, but it can also lead to some really remarkable opportunities. Please welcome Jill.
I was at dinner one evening when a friend of mine shared with me her concern about using her husband's last name, which is Jewish sounding, when traveling in Europe. She shared this over dinner again, just in a very casual sort of way. I learned that tattoos, which I thought were the province of Hell's Angels and rock star band members, I learned to appreciate these tattoos because I have 2 sons who have arm sleeves. It was through working with a business owner who was near getting evicted from her building that I learned the stress that this causes a business owner. I feel very blessed and fortunate to live a life that is enriched by the lived experiences of the people around me. My name is Jill Johnson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. For the last 40 years, I've worked with every segment of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, from small business owners, founders, and entrepreneurs, to corporations and universities, to angel investors and VCs. And I'm here today to challenge you to be the change that we want to see to create a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. So let's talk about what that means. Our ability to change, our capacity for change, really starts with the diversity of our own experiences, lived, and more importantly, learned. It's through our learned experiences that we understand that the barriers, struggles, and pain that others experience may not be what we have seen in our own lives. It's the barriers, it's through lived experiences that I learned that the barriers, struggles, and pain that I've experienced do not necessarily exist for others. It's through learned experiences that the myth of meritocracy gets debunked. Many of us go through life believing that we are where we are and that we have accomplished and we've succeeded in a system of meritocracy. But what really is accomplished through merit? Well, we all believe that we've accomplished what we've done because we've earned it. We've worked really hard and we've prepared. And certainly we have. And we were in the right place at the right time, and we were connected to the right people, and we had the connectedness to benefit and to share our capabilities because someone opened the door for us. It's really easy to think that people who have not accomplished the same didn't accomplish that because they're not as capable, they're not as competent, they haven't earned it. In a world where we fast pass through long lines at Disney and where we group one our way to getting on the plane first, and we coom on our kids to higher test scores, it's really easy to think that that we're on a different level. But what is really earned through merit? I was having a conversation about this with a friend, and we really had a hard time coming up with what in our lives is really earned through merit. Heck, even kids who are playing youth sports, youth basketball, are able to earn more opportunities to be seen if they can pay for it. So now let's translate this to access to capital. In a capitalist society, the popular thinking, the convention capitalism is based on capital, money, finding the best deals, the best entrepreneurs, capital finding its highest and best use. That's what we think, right? And that's the narrative. Well, what I submit is that capital finds its way to the people who are connected to the people with capital. Now, I want to share a short story that some of you might know about the MLB, Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball thought that it had all of the best players and had all the stars. Well, then they were introduced to the Negro Baseball League, where they were introduced to the likes of Jackie Robinson. Once Jackie Robinson went to the MLB, sure, there were great MLB players there. Jackie Robinson was one of the best. Clearly, MLB did not have all of the best players. So it's up to us to expand our networks, to look in more places for more opportunities where our deals, where we can find the deals and our capital can be put in the right places to grow. It is up to us to be the change that we want to see. It's up to us to be and put ourselves in places where we are the only one. Use your +1 to bring others into the room. We all hear that investors invest in people. Well, what we don't often hear is it's people who they know, like, and trust. And it's through the know, like, trust relationship that capital is invested. It's up to all of us to get to know, like, and trust more people. What I wanted to talk to you about today is the power of we. It's through the power of we that we're able to see more people and look at our networks and understand that there is greatness all around us. Many of you in this room have spent a lot of time being intentional about finding your why. Well, I want to ask you to be more intentional about expanding your we. It's through the power of we that we change the status quo. Get to know more people. Get to know more networks. Put yourself in more rooms. Invest in more people in whom you have not invested before. Thank you.
Up next, we have Michael Hungerford. Michael is the founder of 7 Generations Capital, and he's going to share with us how his organization is working with indigenous communities to restore land and regenerate culture. Please welcome him.
I used to walk in 2 worlds. On my father's side, there's a story of settlers from England to Vancouver, a business family, creating such organizations like TELUS and philanthropic organizations like the Vancouver Foundation. On my mother's side, we are Indigenous, Gwich'in First Nation. Our people followed the heartbeat of the caribou through what now some people call Alaska, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. These 2 worlds came together when my parents met in grade 3. But for most of my life, like so many others, I had to keep these 2 worlds apart. You see, my grandmother had experienced trauma, discrimination, and racism, and she wanted to protect my generation from that. So we were not allowed to be public with our Indigenous roots. I had to be separate from myself. And this story of separation mirrors a much bigger story, a system that separated Indigenous peoples from their land, from their culture, from opportunity, from capital, from each other. And Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island have been separated from land and their sacred relationship with it. Take for San Francisco, for example, the Ohlone people. They have been separated from their land like so many other communities across North America. But it's not just land, it's ownership. And without ownership, Indigenous communities have been separated and left out of the financial system. Without land as collateral, they've not been able to grow. Without growth, there's been no wealth. And it's a cycle of separation that continues today. But there's a way to break that cycle, to bring things back together. It's called the 7 Generations Lease. And it's using a financial instrument that's very conventional and typical throughout the world, that is well recognized. Let me explain it. Instead of leasing land for 100 years to conventional property developers, Indigenous communities have a choice with 7 Generations Capital to enter into an equity partnership, a partnership that allows the community to be part of decisions, to co-own, to co-create, to co-design projects that create meaningful benefit to the community. Benefits such as revenues, rents, fees, procurement, capacity building. The community benefits from projects in a very deep way. Seven-generation projects restores the environment. 30% of our lands that we develop in community are restored and dedicated for green space. All of our projects have the highest standards of environmental sustainability. And thirdly, culture is respected. Language, ceremony, storytelling is incorporated into projects in a very deep and meaningful way. Community space is created. Health clinics, educational space, housing, community space. If we take a look at some real numbers, this is a real example. On the one hand, in a conventional model, a developer who's extractive might make a $21 million payment to the community for a piece of land and lease it away for 100 years, leaving the community out of the process. Instead, the Seven Generations Capital lease is a partnership where the community benefits 59 times more, just on the financial inclusion metric alone. 59 times more, $1.2 billion over the same period of time. Ownership matters. This is an example of the land. And then, so what would you choose? Inclusion or exclusion? Restoring the land or ignoring it? Regenerating culture or separating culture? For many First Nation communities, unfortunately, that choice is not on the table. Inclusion is not offered. What does inclusion look like? What does cultural respect look like? These are just some examples. And the deep and meaningful relationship we have with communities means that these communities can move forward on their path towards self-determination. The Seven Generations lease brings things back together. It says you belong and you matter. I had a story told to me by an elder a couple years ago that I will never forget. There was a time when the government and industry decided, without consulting the community, to dam the river that fed the community. The salmon were blocked from entering the streams, and the community starved. And in that period of famine, they went to the riverbanks and they foraged and harvested wild asparagus. That asparagus now, those stories have inspired a project where we are reseeding and replanting that wild asparagus along the same riverbank. And the wild asparagus art and design forms part of the centerpiece of the project. That story is part of their past, and now it's part of their future. We hear these stories through talking circles that we host in community, and it's through these talking circles that we listen and we learn so much. At one of these such talking circles, I sat next to an elder who held my hand, and with tears in her eyes, she said to me, "You see me." And it felt like it was my grandmother talking to me. And those tears were very much about her healing and me healing. For the first time in a development, the community felt like they'd been listened to, and their voices were heard, and they were involved in decisions that had to do with their land. Ten years ago, when my grandmother passed away, I was given permission to be whole. I was offered the choice to walk this world and to self-identify as an Indigenous person. And today I stand before you proudly, a member of the Gwich'in First Nation. And I invite all of you to think about how we together, what we can do to make this world whole. Our land, our communities, our future. What would you build if you could be whole? Because for me, I am now whole, and I invite you to join me. Thank you. Masi cho.
How are you all doing? Do you need a little stretch? Are you okay? All right. So our next speaker is Jared Yarnall-Sheen. Jared is the Director of Innovation at the Biomimicry Institute, and he's going to share with us some thoughts about what happens when we let nature be our model, how that can dramatically change the way that we develop products, the economies that we have and the economies that we support, and overall be better for people and the planet. Please welcome him.
Thanks so much, Laura. And I've just loved how much nature has been centered here as we talk about systems change. And I'm going to continue that with our friends, the beaver. So how many of you have had an opportunity to watch beavers build a dam and turn a forest into a pond? Anyone? Well, they're ecosystem engineers that have sculpted land across North America. And growing up, I had the great privilege of watching a beaver family in action. And by watching and observing and learning from them, I saw that ecosystem disruption is not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, it brings a lot of positives along with it. Over the course of my career, I've supported and funded and trained over 100 different early stage startups tackling some of the biggest issues we're facing today, from food insecurity to plastics pollution. And now, as the Director of Innovation at the Biomimicry Institute, I work with entrepreneurs that are learning from nature to tackle big systemic environmental toxicity and climate issues. Just like our beaver friends, they are disrupting industrial ecosystems to create a thriving and diverse economy. So to help paint the picture of what we do and how we work to create a world that looks and operates like nature, I want to share with you one lesson that I hope you all take away from this, a biology lesson that I wish was taught to me when I was studying to be an engineer. And that is that it's all about the flow of energy and nutrients. So energy enters the planetary system via the sun, primarily. That sun and water and carbon dioxide turns into new material, like the leaf we see here. A secondary consumer comes along, like our beaver friend, and eats that material. Eventually, that beaver might die, or the leaf might fall from the tree and start to decompose. Thank goodness for fungi and bacteria who help make that happen. And those nutrients are then distributed back into the environment. They dissipate back into the environment where they're waiting to be turned into something new. So that's the biology side. Here's what I was taught as an engineer and what many of you might know as a system. Energy enters into our system via an extracted resource, usually oil. We then use that oil to take material out of the ground, send it halfway around the world, process it, put a whole bunch of chemicals in it, heat it up to super hot temperatures, and then send it back to the stores where you and I might buy that. We use it for a few years and then throw it in the landfill. All along the way, that system leaks. We see that as pollution. That is quite different than the natural model. And the good news is there's some great progress happening in the circular economy space to move us from this linear model. But we'd like to help evolve that definition to really look at a fundamental law, the second law of thermodynamics, that states that all energies will dissipate energy, or to put another way, all systems will leak. So we do see this happen. I mentioned pollution. We see oil spills, we see trash on the side of the road, we see literal islands of plastics in our ocean. So that doesn't happen in natural environments, though. When a tree falls in the forest or when that beaver dam reaches its end of life, it breaks down into those basic building blocks of water and carbon dioxide and other nutrients that were used to make that. And those nutrients go throughout the environment, ready to be turned into something new. So here is the brief and bold idea and what brought me here today, and it's to explore what would our world look like if we adopted that model? How would our definition of the circular economy evolve if we looked at this, that all systems will leak? How will we change how we design and fund our world today? And to help illustrate that point, I have an example I'd like to share with you. 50% of microplastics found in the ocean come from paint. 50%. How we make paint today is similar to the story I told you. We usually extract resources from the ground, a mineral, a metal, or oil, to use it as a pigment or a dye. We mix it with a plastic acrylic binder, add in a solvent like water or oil, and then paint our buildings. Over time and at the end of its life, the plastic breaks down and sheds out as a microplastic into the environment. So, putting on our Asking Nature hat, what would nature do? Let's look at one of the most brilliant organisms I know that doesn't do any of that and does not release microplastics, the peacock. These brilliant colors are caused by a phenomenon known as structural color. You can find out more if you search for that, but very quickly, there's a nanostructure kind of pattern that reflects wavelengths of light back to your eyes, and that's what we perceive as color. There's no pigments or dyes involved in this. This is an organic material, so at the end of its life, when that peacock or butterflies that exhibit the same trait break down, they turn back into basic building blocks, ready to be turned into something new by the environment all around us. Scientists from the University of Cambridge have been studying this, and they've found a way to create 100% cellulose-based paints and pigments. Cellulose is that same material that the beaver uses to make their dam. At the end of its life, this paint will break down and dissipate back into beneficial ingredients to be used and turned into something new. So we've supported 2 startups out of this lab, and they're both going on to disrupt this $200 billion paints and coatings industry. And I really love sharing this example because it makes us ask the question, what if we replace the source of microplastics from the very beginning? We don't have to worry about the cleanup, but what if we could actually replace that just by looking and asking for nature's help and guidance? So just like our beaver friends, who are ecosystem disruptors, and we believe that we can learn from nature to disrupt our industrial ecosystems. Millions of years of evolution have taken place that we can learn from, and from that learning, I truly believe that we can create a planet that not only is beneficial for humans, but for all species we share our home with. Thank you so much.
Before I bring out our last speaker, I just wanted to share with you that you already know that events like SOCAP happen because of a great deal of work. All year round, the staff works on making this the best event that they can, and now, this week, volunteers and the AV people are the ones who make all of us look good. So if you could please give them a little bit of a thank you, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Our last speaker is Jasmine Rashid. She is the Director of Impact for the Candide Group, and she is going to share with us some simple, clear ways that anyone can engage in financial activism. So when you are away from your desk, when you are on vacation, when you're away from thinking about impact work every minute of your life, you can still do really simple things that will make a difference. Please welcome her.
Hello, hello. My name is Jasmine Rashid. I am the Director of Impacts at Candide Group. I'm a social movement scholar, and I recently published a playbook about something I've been researching, practicing, and generally nerding out about for years: financial activism. Namely, how people shift the flow of money and power to reclaim wealth and collective well-being. How women, people of color, and the generally disinvested repurpose capital as a tool for self-determination. And how we redesign our modern financial systems to be sensible for the majority of us, Because if we're trying to create an economy that works for the 99%, it should probably be co-created by the 99%. And while financial activism isn't new, it is incredibly timely. We're collectively experiencing a moment of extreme financialization, one of the biggest trends most people have never heard about. Financialization is essentially the extractive economy's strategy of engineering profit maximization into virtually every corner of our lives, with the explicit goal of funneling wealth earned by working people up to the already ultra-wealthy. It exacerbates the growing wealth gap, and it's the reason why everything from veterinarian practices to daycare centers seem to now be driven by faceless private equity firms. Financial activism is key to how we counter insidious trends of extracting profit for a few at the expense of communities. Let me give you an example. In the summer of 2018, many of us were jarred by the news of immigrant detention and mass family separation. Turns out that the vast majority of migrants, over 70%, were being held in for-profit prison corporations who had a literal heads-for-beds profit motive to lock up as many folks as they could in dismal conditions. Now, many of us may have felt powerless to challenge this shadowy industry, but we realized that everyday people did have one major financial superpower: a good old bank account at one of the major banks that had quietly been lending our money to the private prison industry. So, under the banner of the Families Belong Together coalition, hundreds of us began delivering petitions to our bank branches around the country, including right here in San Francisco. We were led by immigrant moms who had survived the horrors of family separation, and we very publicly urged our banks to break up with the private prison industry. We also recruited asset managers and investors to the coalition, folks who could really speak the language of finance and that insider language to the big bank representatives. And many of those bank representatives professed a deep commitment to human rights and could see that supporting for-profit incarceration, newly exposed ESG risk, and might not be the best PR. After months of organizing from all angles, we saw something interesting happen. First, Chase Bank publicly committed to no longer bank the private prison industry. Then Wells Fargo, then Bank of America followed, and so on until ultimately more than $2 billion, the majority of the industry's financing, was affected, altering private prison companies' ability to raise outside capital to this day. People power did that. Financial activism did that. So when we are thinking about systems change and how we can do this from the perspective of everyday people, we really need to be thinking about how we're creating culture change and financial change that invites in the previously not invited. In my work, I like to offer 8 core strategies for everyday financial activism: talking about money, banking on ourselves, flexing some buying power, giving and receiving money, showing up for one another beyond money, shifting budgets, leveraging the magic of investing, and redesigning how we do business. There's a lot there, and within these 8 strategies, there are virtually endless opportunities for us to shift the flow of capital in line with social movements. It's exciting and maybe a little overwhelming. So where do we begin? Let me suggest we keep it simple. The first step to practicing everyday financial activism is just to be curious, to question, why is this like this? Why are the small businesses in my town being replaced by big box stores? Why is it so hard for my coworkers and I to see what our 401ks are invested in? And who lent us all this compounding student debt and why? Then step 2 is to ask yourself and check in, so how do I feel about this? Because honestly, it's easy to skip over the emotional, psychological, spiritual effects of dealing with money and finance and the harsh realities of wealth inequality. We might try to go straight to problem solving without acknowledging our trauma around money, or that all of us live in a culture in which financial trauma is normalized. And that often leads us to treat others and ourselves with less than full dignity. So it's really important that we stay curious, that we check in on our messy emotions. And then step 3 is fun. We get to map what's possible. Let's take that absurd levels of student debt example. Maybe you allow yourself to imagine, as a thought experiment, what it might look and feel like if everyone around you's student debt and medical debt, while we're at it, was canceled. And it may feel a little jarring, it may feel a little uncomfortable, but we really need to give ourselves permission to dream a just economy into existence. And when we're feeling energized and nourished with possibilities, we then get to move to step 4, which is to ask ourselves, okay, individually, what's practical for me right now, like today? Maybe you just take a minute to check in on your loans and make sure you actually understand the terms. Or maybe you amplify a scholarship fund that helps students access higher education without crushing debt in the first place. Whatever feels practical and accessible to you and your personal life, this step really helps us build the muscles of reclaiming agency around money decisions so that we're ready for step 5, where the magic happens, which is to ask your community, what can we do together? It might look like having conversations like this that destigmatize shame and secrecy around money and finance. Or it might look like joining one of the many collectives that already use financial activism in their organizing, like the Debt Collective. One individual action and intentionality around money is meaningful, but it's when we combine our efforts and energy in solidarity, out loud, that we begin to alchemize collective power. So, when you leave here today, please take this framework with you. Financial activism is yours to experiment with, not only for your own money, but for all the pools of capital around you by virtue of your workplaces, your institutions, your local budgets, and pools of capital of all shapes and sizes. Because, as Octavia Butler has gifted us, the only lasting truth in this world is change. Financial activism is a part of reclaiming our ability to shape that change in our communities, economy, and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming out to hear Brief and Bold. Things like this need an appreciative audience, and you all have been wonderful. I'd like to invite our speakers back out for one more round of applause. Come on. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day here at SOCAP and keep changing the world.